Georgie Rose, and today we're going to be talking about a piece called How Is It That People Come to Understand That It Is Truly Important to Understand What Is Truly Important? Likewise, how do people come to understand the importance of understanding? And this was inspired, that title is based on a question that Josh Field over at Voicecraft asked, and the subtitle, a way that Mr. Tim Adalin articulated the question in a new way. And I think it's really, really important. How do people come to understand that they need to understand? It's not necessarily self-evident. There's a lot of people who say they're practical people, that they don't, worry about ideas. They have their beliefs, and that's kind of the end of it. But there's also some people that come to believe that asking questions about life, searching for answers, trying to explore good ideas is important. We have this piece called Ideas Are Practically Eyes, which is the notion that whatever we define as practical is always defined such through our idea of what is practical. So you can't really escape ideas, but it's not necessarily the case that everyone agrees with that premise or that they get it. So how does it happen? How do people come to understand that understanding matters? And then Furthermore, how do they come to understand what truly matters and to think that something truly matters, which is kind of interesting because you have to go through understanding and learn how to understand in order to gain the ability to understand what really matters. So there's two levels here. This reminds me of the question of how does anyone leave Plato's cave on their own, which we've asked before in that work on Plato. And, Plato describes people as dragged out, but what about the first prisoner? Someone had to leave the cave on their own at some point in order for there to be people outside the cave to drag people out. So how did that occur? Or what about the prisoner who nobody comes for? What's going on? How do people come to understand that they need to value what truly matters, and that in of itself requires learning how to understand? How does this occur? It reminds me of the Christian question you see in theology of how does someone know they need to believe in God, or how is somebody saved? If you're totally depraved or you're in sin, you don't even recognize your need to be saved. There's this kind of tension in Christian theology, because if you say, well, it's because humans have free will, then you risk taking away glory from God, because then some of the credit goes to human beings. But then if you say humans, it's totally God, then it seems like it's arbitrary, that God just randomly picks people. And why would that be the case? Unless you want to do something like a universal salvation, which seems to be what Karl Barth believes, but I'm not entirely sure on Mr. Barth. So anyway, those questions kind of parallel together. It's in Christianity, there's this emphasis on grace, but then the mechanism by which grace enters a person's life is something that has to be explored. I think to start, the answer might have something to do with a way that Walker Percy answered a question. Someone asked, and Flannery O'Connor has a great essay on this, someone once asked Walker Percy why the South had so many good novelists, Faulkner, Percy himself, O'Connor, and he answered, it's because we got beat, because the South got beat. He's referring to the Civil War. And it's a really strange answer, but it's as if what he's saying is that what Flannery O'Connor says is that Percy's saying his idols were shattered. The South's idols were shattered. They realized their notions of how the world worked and how things occurred, their moral systems were wrong, that they were just idols, that they were ideas of the good that ultimately turned out not to be the good, and in fact turned out to be forces of great oppression. And facing that is psychologically very difficult. But a lot of great literature precisely involves tragedy, irony. There's an irony that the South had these idols thinking that they were the optimal way to live, and then it turned out that they were forces of oppression, mainly on African Americans, or that they were all artificial. So you go through irony, you go through paradox. These are the materials of great literature that you don't, what Mr. Percy is getting at is that you don't really tend to write about unless you really, on a very deep emotional and full body level experience, or you certainly don't tend to write about them well, because we tend to write about what we experience. So by the South going through that, they tended to produce great literature. I think we see this in the Russians as well, the tragedy and irony of a Dostoevsky, a Pushkin, a Tolstoy. There's a similar principle going on. If you have the Russia with their ideas of the great empire, maybe the next Marxist utopia, and seeing all of the ironies that emerge when people think they know what's going to give rise to the best of all possible worlds, and that very effort then leads to a collapse, or perhaps the worst of all possible worlds. So the first step to coming to realize the importance of understanding and what really matters, first seems to require epistemic humility, which is the recognition that our worldview may just be a worldview and not a view of the world. We tend to experience our interpretation of things not as interpretation, as reading. And that leads to fundamentalism or closed-mindedness, which can give you the horrors of the South that the Civil War brought to an end. And that the realization that it was all an idol can give rise to great literature. So likewise, the realization that our worldviews are in fact just interpretations can be existentially destabilizing and psychologically difficult to accept, but that also creates a necessary opening in our minds to see the necessity of understanding. Because here's the thing. You don't value understanding if you just keep just always believing what you've always believed. That our initial beliefs tend to be a result of absorbing them from the surrounding world or the circumstances we're born into. They don't tend to be a result of gaining understanding, but absorbing. And this is explained in the paper Compelling, which is in the conflict of mind. So if you just stay believing what you've always believed, it feels like, and you experience it as having understanding, but really what you've done is just absorbed. So you don't even actually begin ever having true, meaningful understanding except from a place of opening to possibility and opening to something different from what you've been born with and that you've absorbed. And that in of itself is an act of epistemic humility. You'll even go in the paper, The Blank Canvas, there it is explored that you also need a dialectic between thought and action to really have intellectual development. So there's another thing, epistemic humility also makes up an opening where you have to go into the world and act in it and explore, because you don't know everything and your thinking is ultimately incomplete and just something that you've absorbed. So you need to do more than just think what you've always thought and assume it's true. You have to act and go into the world. And this can be overlaid with the phenomenological journey that Dr. Cadell last talks about regarding Hegel, or the return to common life, that whole journey described in Deconstructing Common Life, which is in regard to David Hume. So it would seem like another thing that's important for people to come to understand the importance of understanding is they have to undergo some kind of process, like Hegel's phenomenological journey or Hume's return to common life, which makes them accept their finitude and integrate with lack. Now, what integrate with lack means is just explored in the Philosophy of Lack series with Dr. Lass, Ebert, Adalin, and I will turn you to that. So another issue is that we have to really get what matters, we have to get a sense of what we think matters actually corresponding with reality. There has to be a real sense that what we understand has something to do with the real world, that it corresponds. It's not merely coherent as a worldview, but it's a worldview that has something to do with the world. So we have to feel like what we believe is relevant. And this topic is again explored in the Truism, the Rational Trilogy, and the piece on conspiracies and Pandora's rationality. We'll explore that as well. We need to feel like it is possible for our understanding to have something to do with reality, that it's possible for our beliefs to have something to do with reality, but that in of itself is going to require something beyond our beliefs, something beyond rationality, something that's you could call non-rational or trans-rational, because that's going to feel like it is whatever that is going to feel like you're accessing the world that is under your worldview per se, the actuality through your interpretation. So you have to have an experience that complements what you believe is true or your understanding, that's going to give you reason to think that your understanding actually has something to do with actuality and the world. Otherwise, you're just there would be no reason to think that your worldview is in any way whatsoever a view of the world. Now, again, we can never achieve certainty that our worldview perfectly corresponds with the world, and it's always ultimately going to be incomplete, alluding to Kurt Gödel. But we have to have a feeling that that our worldview has something to do with the world if we're going to have any faith in understanding. Otherwise, why try to understand? If understanding is never actually making progress toward the truth, whatever that might be, then why bother? So we have to gain a feeling that understanding is progressive, that there is the possibility of increased correspondence, and that we have to have confidence in that increased sense of correspondence, even if we cannot have certainty. And I think the experience of beauty is the non-rational occurrence which gives us reason to believe that what we think corresponds with what matters. If what we think feels beautiful to us, if it is based on an experience of the beautiful, then that feeling of beauty feels meaningful, and it feels like it has something to do with something beyond our mere subjectivity. Although people will say that beauty is the eye of the beholder and that beauty has a matter of taste, when you really experience it, that's something people say basically in a classroom outside the experience of beauty. But when you experience a sunset, or you experience the Sistine Chapel, it suspends your sense of taste. You experience it as beautiful regardless of what you think. It just is. It strikes you as objective. It strikes you as transcendent of your subjectivity. It gives you the feel. And I think Kant in the Third Critique, although I've always wanted to go back and reread the Third Critique on the critique of judgment when he talks about the sublime. My understanding of the sublime is that Kant almost suggests that experience of the sublime gives us reason to think that when we judge something, it is possible that judgment has something to do with actuality, even though we're stuck on this side of the noumenon. But that's another topic for another time. Anyway, beauty cannot be reduced to rational terms. It is ultimately a non-rational experience, but it is that non-rational experience that can give us reason to think that our rationality and understanding has something to do with whatever is beyond our subjectivity, and that it matters. So in the act of beauty, in the very act of giving you reason to have confidence in your understanding, simultaneously suggests that the thing that you're understanding matters. So beauty gives you both of those moves at the same time, because like I said at the beginning, you have to have belief that understanding can actually understand something real and actual and therefore be meaningful, and you have to understand what truly matters. So how do you determine what truly matters, and how do you gain confidence in the very act of understanding itself? Beauty gives you both. That's where the experience of beauty is so powerful and so important. You gain both of those steps that you need in the act of beauty. Simultaneously, because what you experience is beautiful, as meaningful, it also becomes the grounds for a real choice. For a real commitment with which the end of reconstructing Isaiah is going to say is necessary for us to say overcome the meaning crisis, for us to feel like the world out there is actually real as opposed to some giant simulation. And it gives us reason to take a leap of faith, to allude to Kierkegaard, towards something and to believe that it is worth the risk. And there always has to be risk. But beauty gives us reason to take that risk and to feel like that risk is actually going to be worth it. And will give us also enough confidence to face the fears of taking that risk. And the one who fears is not made perfect in love. And all of this, I think, does suggest the wisdom of Keats at the end of the Grecian Urn when he says, beauty is truth, truth is beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. That deep, profound link between beauty and truth, I think, is absolutely true. And because beauty gives you both reason to have confidence in your understanding, that understanding is not limited and stuck in subjectivity, that you can in fact experience things that have something to do with what is beyond subjectivity, and it also gives you reason to think that that thing that you experience is beautiful truly matters, not merely matter in terms of taste. And if everyone were to have these kind of experiences, these experiences of beauty, which would give them grounds to truly understand that it's important to truly understand, and would give them grounds to think that their life is committed to what really matters, this would make the world of beauty a better place. And for this reason, I think Dostoevsky is right that beauty will save the world. For more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com. And thank you for your time. And thanks to Josh and Tim, Mr. Adlin, Mr. Field, for their thoughts that inspired this reflection.